You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Friday. And we are back. We're doing it. It's not really Friday here in my local time. It's Friday for you guys, for anyone who's listening. For me, it's Monday. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And as we have covered multiple days, I am out of town at the moment, but that doesn't mean we are taking any time off. We are just doing things on different days and pushing it out on other days. So nonetheless, as promised, my Michigan story, we're going to cover it all, from how I came to have anything regarding Michigan, to my time in school, to what I did in life, how Michigan served me very well in different avenues of life, as well as how covering the team, how I got here. So we'll try to make that last part, the latter two segments, if I can manage. As you all know, I can be long-winded. So we'll see how that works out. But we will start off with early life and school and all of that now, just as our day off. So again, remember, I'm out of town. So if there's been news that's broken since we'll cover, since basically Tuesday night, we will hit it up when I get back next week. So let's get into it. Let's get into how because I, as many of you might know, even though I have found myself dealing in trying to be objective and unbiased as much as possible, and I try to deliver things to you as straight as I possibly can, I grew up in a Michigan household, and I went to Michigan. That shouldn't be a giant shock to most, but I will note, one of the weirder things about my job is I've never been much of a push the rivalry buttons type of person in general. I just haven't been, ever. Like, I have a friend, my friend Brian, he lives in Columbus, but he worked with me in LA, and he's a huge Ohio State guy, and he'd always try to, needle the rivalry. And I was just always like, all right, that's just not how I am. It's just not how I was raised, with good sportsmanship. So I always find it funny when they, I get particularly mostly Sparties being like, well, you're just a biased Wolverine. And I'm like, listen, I don't care. All right, but we'll get to all that. So, like I said, I grew up in a Michigan household. My grandfather, who I am currently visiting in Florida, is a Michigan alum, as he once reminded me once we were in California. I was out there working, and we went to watch the 2009 Michigan State game. The Tate Forcier-led Michigan Wolverines on the road in East Lansing. And it didn't go well, of course, for Michigan, but we were at a bar at that time called South in Santa Monica, and he near the end of the game, he turns to me and says, back when I was a Michigan student, Frisk Chrysler was the coach. And it was like, whoa. But that's how deeply ingrained it is in me, because not only did did he go to Michigan, my Aunt Lori, my mom's younger sister, went to Michigan. She met her husband at the University of Michigan. I grew up singing the Victors, just the chorus. I never knew any more than that. So sorry to the Patrick Barons of the world that can sing every word to Varsity. I didn't know Varsity was a thing for a long time. But nonetheless, when I was planning on going to school, I was always like, I'm going to Michigan. And I went to private schools for first 7 grades rather, and then I switched to Holly Public Schools in 8th grade. And despite the advisor that would come from Michigan to Holly, she used to always say, well, we're not going to accept anyone from Holly, but which was really disappointing. Nonetheless, I still got in. It was the only place I intended on going. The only other place I would have considered was Eastern Michigan, just so that I could be close to Michigan. But I thankfully didn't have to deal with that. I managed to get into Michigan in 1999, now forever ago. But as much as that was what I wanted to do, was get into Michigan and all of that, I dropped it, right? I dropped the bag. I did not take it seriously because I didn't want to. I was more concerned with my metal band playing, well, not that guitar. That guitar I've only had for about 3 years. But it was, I only cared about being a musician. And since I couldn't get into any creative classes like film, which I kept on trying to, I just didn't go to class and didn't drop any classes, dropped out of school. 5 years later, I finally realized I need to do something. I can't just be this college dropout. And I came back. I had to work at it. I had to go to Oakland Community College for a couple semesters. But I got just to show that I was serious to the university, and then they let me back in. And then I was able to start taking film classes. I think it was like my second year. I finally was able to start taking film classes. And that's what I majored in. I majored in, at that time, it was called Screen Arts and Cultures, which I still laugh about, not only the name, figured out what we abbreviated that to, but also sometimes I'll express film opinions on Twitter, and I've had a couple people say, stick to sports, you clearly are overwhelmed in the film world, which is hilarious because not only do I have a film degree, but I worked in Hollywood for 4 years. But my cumulative time in the film world is equal now to my time covering Michigan football. But nonetheless, so that's that. I went to Michigan. That's how I fell in love with the team, because I always, here's the thing. When I was a high school student, it was in the 90s. It was a time in which you could do music or you could do sports. You couldn't do both. So I was all team music, but I did watch Michigan in secret. I'd usually go to my grandparents' house on Saturdays if I didn't have friends over in the fall, and we would watch the Michigan games. And that's how I was like, Tom Brady, he's our guy. I had no idea, my freshman year, Tom's senior year, that there was a Brady Henson thing. I didn't go to any games. I watched a couple on TV. I lived in Fletcher Hall, which is really close to the stadium, so I could hear what was going on. But I was Tom Brady all the way. But I was very ignorant about the game of football in general. I just didn't care that much. But when I came back in 2004, 2005, I started paying a lot more attention. I was a sports person by that point anyway. And 2006 is when I finally started going to games. My first game that I went to was against Wisconsin, the Big Ten opener in 2006. And Michigan won handily. And I believe that was the only game that Wisconsin lost that year. That sold me on it. After that, because I was such a Detroit Lions person, no more. I was all in, not to use a Rich Rod quote, I was all in for Michigan. And that obviously continued, and it grew after I moved to LA. So actually, we are going to talk more about that here in a moment. And then I guess third segment will be, how did I get into what I'm doing now? Unless I can mix some in the second. We'll see how short-winded I can be, but you know how I am. Anyway, BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as football continues its march through the playoffs. Right to the big game in a couple weeks, BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just football. BetOnline has up-to-the-minute info on pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, right along with live real-time updates of current games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the new amazing offers available for the 2022 season. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, let's continue this discussion. It's not really a discussion, it's story time. My Michigan life, just so you know my bona fides. We'll get into the sports part here momentarily, but so I was back in school. I was obsessed with Michigan football. I graduated with that degree in Screen Arts and Cultures. I moved to Los Angeles to pursue being a talent agent. And how did I get to work at United Talent Agency, which is the third biggest talent agency in the world? The only ones that are bigger are CAA and William Morris Endeavor, which at that time when I first got there, it was just Endeavor. William Morris was the fifth. But I targeted UTA as the place I wanted to work. And why is that? Because it is led by, or not necessarily led by, but founded by Peter Benedek, who is a Michigan alum. If you go to North Quad, which wasn't built at the time that I was in school, but I've been in there since, there is a Benedek Family Commons, and he's a giant benefactor to the Screen Arts and, well, what used to be Screen Arts and Cultures, and now is just film. It's not film video. I don't remember what it's called now, but nonetheless, he had a annual event at his house in Brentwood that I would go to, and I did go to it all the time, but this was the first time in 2008. I went and someone got me an invite. You just had to donate money to the film school, which fine, cool. And I told him, hey, I want to, I'm a Michigan guy. Obviously everyone here is, but I want to be a talent agent. I want to work with you. I want to work with, I don't think I necessarily knew that I wanted to be in motion picture talent. But I that's what I wanted, and that's what I ended up doing. So he got me the interview, and I guess I took it from there. I didn't think that I was going to, after my second interview, it felt really bad, but I got the call later that day saying that I was accepted and I was going to start work in about a month. And you start in the mailroom and you work your way up. And the great thing about UTA is that there's a lot of Michigan people there. There still are a lot of Michigan people there, including, and we never actually crossed paths, but for instance, J.B. Fitzgerald, the former Michigan linebacker, is a talent agent there at UTA. UTA still they represent Chris Webber, they represent Rich Eisen, they represent people, and then there's all these agents that also came up and through, and assistants that came up and through who were Michigan people. So there were certainly more Michigan people in that building than any other school, including USC. It was pretty cool. But I hated my experience working in motion picture talent, and what that means is that I was helping put actors into movies, and I absolutely loathed it, and came home for the holidays on the border of 2011 and 2012. I left my car in LA. I ended up staying for a couple months, and then I went back to LA for a couple weeks, and then my uncle was getting married. I came back home and was like, the pull to Michigan in particular, the pull to Ann Arbor is what I can't go back to LA. I don't like it there like I should. As much as I love the weather and the topography, my love for Michigan sports was much bigger. And that was vindicated when I went to my first postgraduate game, going to see the 2012 game against Illinois in a rainstorm. And I literally walked in late and just to see Denard rush right past me for a touchdown. It just really vindicated my feeling that Michigan athletics and Michigan football was everything that I cared about. It was bolstered even more when I had surgery on my lower back and was laid up for a month. But what a month to be laid up, because that month in 2013 was when Michigan basketball was making its Final Four run. And that felt so special. I just remember I was heavily medicated watching the Kansas game and made my mom watch, who had no desire to watch a Michigan basketball game, and just getting to see Trey Burke hit that shot all just made me that much more just into it. But I couldn't find a job. So my thing was I went to the spring game in 2013, and afterwards, I went to Buffalo Wild Wings on campus and was watching some golf, and that got me wanting to play golf just in general, because I hadn't really played. And but in order to afford to play golf, I had to get a job. So I humbled myself and I started working at a seafood restaurant, which Michigan arrogance can be real. So that was, like I said, humbling, but it was actually a great experience. But eventually, again, the pull to the Michigan athletics just wouldn't stop, but I didn't know how to get into it. And I got kind of lackadaisical about life again until, I had a camera. I was working professionally, but as a freelancer doing photo video stuff. That's when I started doing those in 2012 after 2011. Yeah, that's when I started doing those hype videos. Some of you might remember the OG hype videos that I used to do. They were always on the front page of MGO blog. Unfortunately, can't see them anymore. I had to pull them all off of the YouTube, but for copyright. But that's what got me kind of starting to go. And I met the MGO blog people and was going to try to do some stuff with them. I was putting myself out there to anyone who would listen. I remember messaging Tim Sullivan at Rivals, and he just didn't listen to me. and some other people. I remember being like, hey, look at what I can do. I can be an asset. I can do this. Let me do photo, video type stuff for you guys. And then that fateful call came in 2015. And I was a member of Wolverine 24/7. And Steve Lorenz messaged me and says, hey, can I give you a call? What's your number? And I was bartending that night. It was a Monday night. And my other bartender was trying to leave. I was like, just cover me for like another 5 minutes. An hour later, he's like, dude, seriously, what is wrong with you? I'm like, you don't understand. Because Steve had asked me to photograph the spring game, Jim Harbaugh's first at Michigan. And that's where it all took off. So, all right, let's continue the story. Probably got another 12, 13 minutes in me. But we'll continue talking about it here momentarily, and we'll get into probably what you want to know more. How did I get to go from being a server and bartender to where I'm at right now, which is living in Ann Arbor? I think that's what you want to know? I don't know. All right, but first I got to tell you a little something about Built Bar. Y'all know how much I love Built Bar. If you don't know what it is, it's a protein bar that tastes like a candy bar. It is high protein, low calorie, low carb. It's everything you want as far as those macros are concerned. I tend to have 2 at a time because I am a glutton. But guess what? It's not gluttonous because it's still higher protein, lower calorie than getting a Metrics Big 100. So many delicious flavors. I love the coconut brownie chunk, the peanut butter brownie. I need to remind myself to order the white chocolate cookies and cream if those are still out there. But I'm telling you, I put my money where my mouth is. I have bought dozens of boxes of my own volition with my own money. I absolutely adore the product. So join me on my crusade. Go to built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15. That's built.com. Promo code LOCKED15 to get 15% off of your next order of Built Bar. All right, let's continue on here. I will now get into the part that you all know me from, covering Michigan football. But it didn't start right away, right? It started with the spring game, in which I was just a photographer. And and that actually came on the heels. I didn't even get to covering the bust for the program from the Alumni Association in 2014. That kind of helped open Steve Lorenz's eyes as to, hey, this is a guy that's done this before. And I got that through the Alumni Association because when I was trying to get serious about not working at a restaurant anymore, I went to the Michigan Well. And they put me on that, and that helped. And, I mean, that was such a dream scenario for me. Devin Gardner and Jake Ryan, being around these guys. And it's kind of weird now because, Devin used to do a show with me, for a year. So it's kind of crazy that it's like, okay, I went from that and I still every now and again email back and forth with Jake Ryan. So anyway, obviously I wanted to do this for a living, and I got in a taste, and they said, hey, you can cover the games as a photographer. We don't have any writing positions, but I said, I am going to write anyway. So I just started doing it. And with the idea that maybe someone at 24/7 Sports will notice the good work and, doing photo and video, and I'll cover recruiting and I'll do all of that kind of stuff. And so I did it for a full season, and I did a little bit of everything, and I went to every press conference. The only things that I missed were a handful of road games, but I didn't say all of them. I went to Indiana and Penn State on my own, and I covered every press conference. I wrote 4 articles per press conference, and I just kind of didn't know anything about beat writing, but just watched what Angelique was doing. I watched what Nick Baumgardner was doing, and I learned from them. It was like school for me. And just that I watched what they were doing. I didn't ask questions that often. Certainly not of Jim Harbaugh. Now, I did ask Jim Harbaugh a question, and I could dig and put this in here. I'm not going to, though. But I'll tell you about it. The first question I ever asked Jim, it did not go well at all for me. At least it didn't feel like it in the moment. And so I asked Steve on the way to every press conference. I said, hey, do you have anything I should ask Jim? And he's like, yeah, ask him about why the we didn't know that he didn't like scheme questions, right? He said, ask why the horizontal passing game, how that's really aided the vertical passing game. So I asked exactly that. And I got that typical Jim Harbaugh stare right through your soul moment where he's gritting his teeth. He's doing that, thing. And he's like, what do you want me to say? And he's like, we move the ball. And he's like, and he's not to be the master of the obvious. Well, that was misinterpreted by a Michigan Daily student, and they tweeted out, tagging me, no less. Isaiah Hole called the master of the obvious by Jim Harbaugh derails the press conference, and I felt 2 inches tall. I felt awful. This was like week 3 or 4. It did not feel good. I mean, Angelique's like, no, you did okay. And, I was like, oh, it went bad. But, I got through it. And then finally, I started rising through the ranks. 24/7 had me out for the Army All-American Bowl in 2016. I was in San Antonio for the full week. Got to know pretty much all of those kids down there because I was just following them around, taking pictures the whole week, and learning a little bit more and more about recruiting and how to cover recruiting with the help of Steve Wiltfong and Barton Simmons and Tom Loy and Steve Lorenz, who wasn't there, but he was back home. And he would tell me, for instance, like, hey, I think Michigan's got a shot with Devin Asiasi, but no one's really giving it credence. So why don't you go and talk a little bit to Devin and see what you can get? And I did it. And before long, it's every recruiting site and newspapers are like, Michigan's got a real shot. I don't remember what he said that made it seem like, oh, wow, this is big, because I was still relatively new to it. And I followed recruiting, but it was still, I was learning to follow it with a little bit more nuance, something I'm currently not really doing. But it's that was such a learning experience. And then about 6 months later, it was 6 months, I finally got hired by 24/7 Sports to cover Michigan football with Wolverines 24/7. So that's how I got the start. And I was there for several years before this here podcast and Wolverines Wire formed. But it was different, obviously. I was working as a team. It was me, Steve, and Zach Shaw, and we worked really well together. And they're still working really well together. It's just that when the merger happened between Scout and 24/7 happened eventually, I became the expendable one. But didn't have to wait long before USA Today came calling, and asked if I wanted to start Wolverines Wire. So that's how I got to where I'm at. A lot of doing multiple things at once. It's if I was just a photographer or if I was just a writer, I wouldn't be here. But because I did video, because I did photo, because I wrote, because I covered recruiting, and everything that I could possibly do, that's what made it so that I could be in the position that I'm at. Now, beyond that, it's just a matter of, I think, just trying to be even-keeled and level-headed about things. I know I tend to put a positive bent on a lot of things, and maybe that's just my disposition in general. It certainly is my disposition in life, and I think that probably shines through into the work. But it's one of those things where, like I talked about on Monday's show, which I recorded just moments ago, that a lot of people look at this Josh Gaddis leaving situation and say, this is awful for Michigan. What a terrible thing. But I see it not that way. There are certainly circumstances in which I will call a spade a spade. Jim Harbaugh interviewing with the Minnesota Vikings, that no good for Michigan, in my opinion, that any of that stuff happened. But do I think it's going to impact the season? Probably not, because it happened in January, about as far away from the season as you can get. Maybe February. I don't know technically what day that was. But that's how I got to where I'm at. And I thank you all for coming along with me on the journey. I probably could have gone a little bit longer as far as the nuances, but this could go from being a 25-minute podcast to like a hour long. But you can let me know on Twitter if you want more of detail of certain things, what it was like for the first game, or what my favorite game, and maybe we'll do a separate like mailbag type thing off of it if you guys are actually interested in hearing what it's like to cover Michigan football, because certainly there's a lot more to it, whether it's the building relationships part, to becoming an insider, because I really was an insider for a couple of years. I don't call myself that now. I'm someone who has sources that will sometimes get the intel. I share it with you here on the podcast, almost never in writing. I have my reasons for that as well. But it's I'll be the first to admit I have the best job in the world. It's incredible. So anyway, thank you all for watching and or listening, and let me know if you want more, especially here as we're in football off season. And because even though we can talk about basketball, certainly we'll have a lot more basketball to talk over the next couple of weeks. But it's this perfect time to do some off-topic type stuff. So anyway, thank you for watching and or listening. We will talk to you again next week. Peace.